Imagine waking up every night, haunted by vivid memories of a war you never fought, in a body that was never yours. This is not a movie script. This is the true story of a young boy who remembered a life on the battlefield, a life that ended long before he was born. Is this proof of reincarnation? Stay with us, because what you are about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about life, death, and the mysteries that connect them. When the sound of gunfire echoed through his dreams, the boy did not wake up screaming. Instead, he stood up, straightened an imaginary steel helmet on his head, and walked into a battle that had ended more than half a century ago. James Holloway never imagined that his 6-year-old son, Ethan, would forever change the course of his life. The Holloways lived in a small town in southern Tennessee, where memories of war survived only in faded photographs, hanging in the dusty halls of the old church. Ethan had always been an ordinary child until the night he woke up, shouting strange words, calling out names no one in the family had ever heard. At first, James and his wife, Linda, thought it was just nightmares. But then, the nightmares kept returning, each time more vivid. Each time more precise. Ethan began to talk about things no 6-year-old should know: military formations, unit numbers, brutal battles, even the sensation of a bullet tearing through the air. One morning, as they sat at the breakfast table, Ethan suddenly put down his sandwich and whispered, "We are surrounded. I must hold the line. No retreat." James froze. He realized the boy was not simply dreaming. He was remembering that day. James went to the town library. He dug through dusty archives, pulling old military records, searching for the names and places Ethan had mentioned: Bastogne, Operation Market Garden, Corporal David Sullivan. James' heart pounded harder with each discovery. Corporal David Sullivan, a paratrooper with the 101st Airborne Division, had died in World War II in the Battle of Bastogne, 1944, a name Ethan could never have known, a battle James himself had never studied in detail, a coincidence too eerie to ignore, or perhaps something much, much bigger. James made a decision that day. He would find the truth, no matter how unbelievable it sounded, because somehow his son was carrying the weight of memories that did not belong to this life. And the bigger question loomed ahead: how could a soul carry the scars of a war long past? James Holloway spent the next few days digging deeper. At night, when the house was quiet and Ethan slept upstairs, James sat hunched over old records, military archives, and forums for veterans' families. The more he read, the more disturbed he became. The details Ethan had mentioned matched historical facts perfectly. The 101st Airborne had indeed fought in Bastogne. Operation Market Garden was a real campaign. Corporal David Sullivan had been a real man, stationed exactly where Ethan claimed. But there was something even stranger. Ethan described things not found in public records. During breakfast one morning, he casually told James about a hidden path behind the command tents at Bastogne, used secretly by wounded soldiers to retreat under fire. James, skeptical but curious, found a memoir from a surviving paratrooper. Buried deep in one chapter was a single mention of a forgotten trail, just as Ethan described, a path known only to those who had been there. James sat back in his chair, goosebumps rising on his skin. Ethan was not guessing. He was remembering. The question was, how, and more importantly, why. One evening, after dinner, James decided to talk directly to Ethan. They sat in the backyard, under a wide Tennessee sky glowing with the last light of sunset. Ethan toyed with a small model airplane in his hands, tracing circles in the dirt. James cleared his throat. "Ethan," he said gently, "can you tell me more about, Before Ethan looked up, his expression suddenly very old for someone so young. "I remember the cold," he said. "It was so cold my hands turned blue. We had no food. The snow was red." James swallowed hard. "And what happened to you?" "Son." Ethan hesitated. Then he said, almost in a whisper, I tried to save my friend. His name was Mike, but the shell landed too close. I remember flying, and then nothing. James felt the world tilt slightly beneath him. His 6-year-old boy was describing death, and not just death, but death in a battle that had raged more than 70 years ago. James pressed on, voice trembling. How do you remember all this? Ethan, the boy shrugged. Simple as only a child could be. I just do. When I sleep, I go back there. Sometimes I see her too. James frowned. See who? Ethan smiled faintly. My sister. Not from now. From before. The revelation hit James like a thunderclap. There was more to this story than a soldier's death. There was a life, a family, a world Ethan had left behind. The dreams were not just nightmares. They were a doorway, and somehow, that doorway was still open. James realized he needed help, not from doctors or psychologists who would dismiss Ethan's memories as imagination. He needed someone who understood what it meant for a soul to wander between worlds, someone who believed. The journey to uncover the truth had only just begun, and James was ready to follow it wherever it led, even if it meant facing a reality no science could explain. James spent the next few days researching quietly. Careful not to alarm Ethan, he came across the name Dr. Margaret Ellison, a retired professor of psychology who had dedicated her career to studying cases of childhood memories of past lives. Dr. Ellison had interviewed hundreds of children who claimed to remember people, places, and events that they should have had no way of knowing. James reached out to her, explaining Ethan's situation in careful detail. To his relief, Dr. Ellison responded with warmth and genuine curiosity. A week later, she arrived at the Holloway's modest home, carrying only a leather-bound notebook and a calm presence that immediately put Ethan at ease. They sat together in the living room, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows. Casting long shadows on the floor, Dr. Ellison spoke gently to Ethan, never pressuring him, simply inviting him to share, and share he did. In a soft, steady voice, Ethan told her about training jumps from C-47 planes, about freezing nights in foxholes dug into the icy soil, about brothers in arms who had become family. But what shook James the most was when Ethan described the final day. We were out of ammunition, Ethan said, his small hands clenching unconsciously. They kept coming. We called for air support, but it never came. I tried to pull Mike back, but I could not. I fell. I remember the snow on my face. And then it was quiet. Tears welled in James's eyes, but he forced himself to stay silent. Dr. Ellison leaned forward. Do you remember anything after that? Ethan, she asked softly. The boy nodded. I floated. I saw them, carrying my body. I wanted to tell them I was still there, but they could not hear me. James felt a chill settle deep in his bones. Dr. Ellison wrote carefully in her notebook, her face unreadable. After the session, she spoke privately with James and Linda. In all my years, she said, I have heard only a few stories as detailed and consistent as this. Ethan is not fabricating. His memories are coherent, historically accurate, and emotionally authentic. James swallowed hard. What does it mean? He asked. Dr. Ellison closed her notebook. It means his soul carries an imprint. Some call it reincarnation. Others call it residual memory. Whatever name we give it, one thing is clear. He lived another life, and that life ended in violence, with unfinished emotions still tethered to this world. Linda's voice shook. Is he in danger? Dr. Ellison shook her head gently. Not physical danger, but emotional weight. Children like Ethan sometimes carry grief, guilt, or longing that does not belong to their current lives. Helping him recognize and release those feelings is crucial. James felt the enormity of it settling on his shoulders. His son was not just fighting nightmares. He was carrying the heavy armor of a life lost to war. James knew then that this was more than just a mystery to solve. It was a healing that needed to happen. For Ethan, and perhaps, in some way, for the fallen soldier whose memories still whispered in the boy's dreams. That night, after Ethan fell asleep, James sat alone on the porch, staring up at the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of time and reason, a young soldier had fallen long ago, and somehow, impossibly, he had found his way back. Through a boy named Ethan, through a second chance, through the fragile thread of memory that refused to break, James made a silent promise under the cold Tennessee sky. He would help Ethan find peace. No matter where the journey led, in the weeks that followed, life settled into a strange rhythm for the Holloway family. By day, Ethan attended school like any normal child, laughing with friends, learning his letters and numbers. By night, the dreams returned. Sometimes they were fragmented images, flashes of cold, fire, fear. Other times, Ethan would wake sobbing, clutching his chest, whispering names that James wrote down carefully in a notebook. Mike, Lum, Captain Reynolds, Sergeant Hale, real names, real soldiers. James verified them one by one through war records and memorial databases. Each time he confirmed another identity, the truth pressed heavier on his chest. Ethan was not imagining any of it. One Saturday morning, James decided to take Ethan on a short trip to the State Military Museum in Nashville. He wanted to see if anything there might help Ethan process his memories. The museum was quiet, filled with echoes of past heroism and sorrow. Ethan wandered through the exhibits silently, his small hand trailing along the glass cases. Then, without warning, he stopped in front of a display about the Battle of Bastogne. James watched as his son's face paled. Ethan stared at an old photograph of paratroopers huddled in snow-covered trenches. Tears filled his eyes. "I know them." He whispered. James knelt beside him. "Heard it heartbreaking. Tell me, son, what do you remember?" Ethan touched the glass gently, tracing the frozen faces. "They were my brothers. We promised to go home together." James squeezed his eyes shut, overwhelmed. Later, in the museum gift shop, Ethan picked up a small replica of a paratrooper badge and held it tightly. "Can I have this?" he asked. James bought it without hesitation. That night, after Ethan fell asleep clutching the badge, James sat by his bedside. He realized something profound. The memories were not fading. They were becoming a part of Ethan's identity, a tapestry woven from two lifetimes, stitched together by sorrow, loyalty, and an unfinished promise. James knew he had to help Ethan find closure. Dr. Ellison suggested a symbolic farewell ritual. She explained that acknowledging the past, honoring it, and then consciously releasing it could help Ethan move forward. James agreed. They planned a simple ceremony by the river at the edge of town, a place where memories could be spoken aloud and then set free. The evening was cool and silent when they arrived. Linda, James, Ethan, and Dr. Ellison stood together on the grassy bank. Ethan held the paratrooper badge in his hand, his face solemn. Dr. Ellison spoke first. "We gather to honor the life that was lived, the bravery that was shown, the love that never faded." Then she nodded to Ethan. The boy stepped forward, voice trembling but clear. I remember being David. I remember my brothers. I remember the cold and the fear. I remember the love we shared. But now, I let go." He knelt and placed the badge gently on a flat stone by the water. The river carried his whispered words away. James felt a weight lift from the air, As if the unseen threads of sorrow had finally been untied, Ethan turned and walked back to his parents, lighter somehow, as if a burden he had carried since birth had finally been set down. James knelt and hugged him tightly. "You are home now, son," he said. "You always have been." The stars blinked awake above them. The river murmured its eternal song, and in the silent embrace of that night, a chapter closed, not forgotten. Never forgotten, but finally at peace. After the river ceremony, something subtle shifted in Ethan. The nightmares did not vanish overnight, but they became less frequent, less violent. He slept deeper, waking with a calm that had long been absent from his small face. At school, he flourished. He made new friends, laughed louder, ran faster. It was as if by honoring the past, he had finally been freed to live fully in the present. James and Linda watched with quiet gratitude. There were still moments when the past flickered through Ethan's eyes, a faraway look when the national anthem played, a hand raised instinctively in salute when passing a veteran in uniform. But those moments no longer weighed him down. They were simply parts of him, threads woven into a larger tapestry that was no longer defined by sorrow. One crisp autumn afternoon, James found Ethan sitting under the old oak tree in their backyard, sketching in a notebook. James sat down beside him. "What are you drawing?" he asked. Ethan smiled and turned the page toward his father. It was a picture of two men standing at the edge of a river, shaking hands. One wore a paratrooper's uniform. The other was simply a boy in jeans and sneakers. Above them, in Ethan's careful handwriting, were three words. Thank you. My brother. James felt tears sting his eyes. Without speaking, he wrapped an arm around Ethan's shoulders. They sat there together in the fading light, two souls connected by bonds deeper than time, deeper than memory. Life would move forward. New memories would be made. But somewhere, in the quiet corners of Ethan's heart, a soldier named David Sullivan would always live on, not as a burden, but as a reminder that love, loyalty, and courage never truly die. They simply find new ways to endure. Through rivers, through dreams, through the beating hearts of those who remember. Some stories are written in ink, some are carved into stone, but the most enduring stories are etched into the soul. Across wars and lifetimes, across dreams and waking hours, the human spirit carries its truths forward. A boy who was once a soldier found his way home. Not through battlefields, not through medals, but through the simple act of being remembered. And in that remembering, he was reborn, not to fight again, but to live, to love, and to finally know peace. Because in the end, the strongest victories are not won by force. They are won by memory, by forgiveness, by the quiet, steady beating of a heart that refuses to forget.